Like Shannon mentioned, I am our Heart Disease and Stroke Prevention Coordinator with Department of Health and have been doing this work for about 2.5 years now and work closely with Chrissy, obviously, with the American Heart Association. We have very similar interests and goals that we are working on. With it being American Heart Month, we're really excited to talk to you about some of the work that we're doing in South Dakota, and that's what I'm going to talk about specifically after Chrissy provides us with some really helpful tips. And I'll also discuss a funding opportunity that we do have, so please make sure you stay tuned till the very end so we can find a little bit more about our programming in South Dakota and some of the initiatives that we're working on.
Thanks, Rachel. So this is Chrissy. My name is Chrissy Meyer. I am the Communications Director for the American Heart Association, and I cover both North and South Dakota and also outstate Iowa, so everything except for Des Moines. And so it is Heart Month, so happy Heart Month to all of you. With our webinar today, we're going to just dive a little bit into kind of some living healthy concepts. Not only talking about what we can do individually, but for our families and for our communities. So the first topic, just kind of diving into this, is to kind of talk a little bit about the American Heart Association. And we are focused on building a culture of health. And that means that we want to ensure that the opportunity for health exists for everyone, no matter where we live, no matter where we work, learn, play, pray, and heal. And so we are working with individuals and communities across the United States and also now around the world to build that culture of health. So for example, it's things like having access to safe streets, having access to safe playgrounds, making sure that our communities have walking paths that encourage children and families to be more physically active. And so we believe that a culture of health is important for individuals and for communities to thrive. And really the big thing, why does that even matter? So the big scary news that we'll get out of the way first is to talk about the fact that for the first time in decades, we are seeing deaths from heart disease and stroke actually rise. And here on this next screen, you can kind of see a couple of charts. And this data is a little old. I haven't updated these charts yet, but as you can see, we have got kind of a scary scenario happening. When we set, the American Heart Association set a goal back in 2010 that we wanted to reduce deaths from heart disease and stroke by 20% by the year 2020. And obviously we're here now, and things are not looking so great. We are just finalizing some of the data so that we can figure out, what was our impact by 2020, and we'll have that information probably by the end of June. But as you can see, the target scenario is represented by that black line. The actual data is represented by the white line. And in the blue circled area, you can see that kind of around the years 2014, 2015, on both the heart disease and the stroke side of things, that line started to curve back up again. And that's a genuine concern to all of us. We've seen a shorter overall life expectancy for the first time in decades. And the reversal of this trend is possibly due to some unhealthy lifestyle choices, but we believe it's something bigger than that as well. Another piece of this puzzle, this is what the percentage of obese adults by state looked like back in 1990. We know that this is a nationwide situation. We also know that over the last 15 to 20 years, these statistics have changed dramatically. This is what the map looked like just in 2015. So in 1990, the majority of our states had less than 20% of their population as obese. In 2015, many states have obesity rates over 30%, including the Dakotas, North and South Dakota both, and a lot of the Great Plains states that are all represented there kind of in that red corridor. The Mississippi, that's the one I always like to point out. I'll flip back up here. So back in 1990, Mississippi would have been considered one of the most obese states in the nation. They're the only yellow one represented on the map. Today, we don't see a lot of yellow on this map. And so the Mississippi of 1990 would actually be considered one of our healthiest states today. So as you can see, we've got some concerns, but there is good news. So we got the bad news out of the way first. Here's the good news. Heart disease and stroke can be prevented with heart healthy choices. So we're going to dive into that and talk a little bit about 3 specific areas. We're going to talk about what we can do for ourselves, what we can do for our families, and what we can do for our communities. So for ourselves, we know that building a culture of health starts with ourselves. The American Heart Association has identified 7 areas that we call Life Simple 7. We're going to dive into each of these a little bit more in detail, but we know, based on the science, that if individuals are focusing on these 7 areas, or even a majority of these areas, they will see a significant improvement in their overall heart health picture. So we're going to dive in, first of all, to eating a healthy diet. You can eat a healthy diet without dieting. We recommend simple, no-fad, healthy eating patterns to nourish your body and bring out your best. So for example, some tips. Concentrating on smaller portions rather than eliminating entire food groups that you love. I hate it when people tell me I need to give up carbs because let's face it, that is just not going to happen. I love pasta too much. Instead, I'm going to eat a reasonable serving of pasta as opposed to eating the entire plate. Add fiber-rich foods that keep you feeling full. So we want to look at whole grains. We want to look at legumes. We want to look at vegetables and fruits. We also want to maybe try to avoid some of those empty calorie foods and sugary drinks. They aren't in your, maybe don't buy them. If they aren't in your pantry, you're less likely to indulge. But you'll notice that we're not saying to eliminate things. We know that food is one of the best parts of life. So what we're saying is let's eat more of the foods on the column on the left, and let's try to eat less of the foods in the column on the right. So there are some things, obviously a great example of this, we in South Dakota especially, we eat a lot of red meat. So one of the things that we recommend is trading out some of those fattier cuts of red meat and looking for leaner cuts of red meat. And a great way to look for that, a tip that I have learned, is to look for cuts of meat that have the word loin in them. So tenderloin, sirloin. We want to look for leaner cuts of our red meat products. In addition, there's some other tips too. Obviously, cooking more at home is a great way to control the foods that you're eating. You'll find recipes at recipes.heart.org. Another thing, we're all going to go out to eat, planning ahead at restaurants. Most restaurants do have their menus online these days, and a lot of them include nutrition content, but you can also use healthydiningfinder.com to find healthier recipes. In addition, you can look for foods certified by the American Heart Association as part of our Heart Checkmark program in the grocery store. And this will indicate foods that have passed our rigorous heart safety standards. Another tip when eating healthy is to be aware of serving sizes. A 12-ounce piece of meat is actually 4 servings. And so we always say a 3 ounces of cooked lean meat or poultry is about the size of a deck of cards. So that's a pretty good visual indicator for a portion size on protein. So the next 2 things we're going to talk about in that Life Simple 7 is moving more and managing weight. We know that if we're eating a little bit smarter, moving a little bit more, we are going to manage our weight. The American Heart Association recommends at least 30 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity at least 5 days a week. So we're aiming for 150 minutes total. In addition, you can break your exercise routine into multiple 10 to 15 minutes routines in a day. It's just as effective as one long workout. So for example, if you are going to the mall or going to a shopping center, park in the furthest spots from the shopping center and walk in. All of those steps do count. So we can break a lot of that exercise and that physical activity. Moving more throughout your day is just as beneficial. Another big thing, smoking. Smoking is the single largest cause of preventable death in the United States. So if you do smoke or if you do use tobacco, finding a way to quit is the best thing that you can do for your heart health. Just some statistics for you. So in your first 20 minutes after quitting smoking, your blood pressure and heart rate recover from the cigarette-induced spike. After 2 weeks to 3 months of smoke-free living, your circulation and lung function begin to improve. Just 1 year after quitting smoking, your excess risk of heart disease is reduced by 50%. In 5 years, your risk of several cancers is cut in half. And if you can maintain your smoke-free lifestyle for 15 years, your risk of coronary heart disease is the same as a non-smoker. So the big news is quitting is good for you, and there are lots of resources. Many of our states have quit lines with some incredible resources that are available to you. So I would encourage you to take advantage of those resources. The final 3 pieces of the Life Simple 7 puzzle are blood pressure, cholesterol, and blood sugar. These are measurements that really can only be found in your doctor's office. So know your numbers. It's important to visit your primary healthcare provider and get an annual physical to get your blood pressure, your total cholesterol, and your blood sugar. We recommend blood pressure no more than 120/80. Cholesterol levels should be less than 200. With your LDL or bad cholesterol, you're going to strive for a number less than 100. And fasting blood sugar should be no more than 100. So this is kind of a quick update. So the American Heart Association changed the blood pressure recommendations back in 2017. And so this is the updated chart. So as you can see, anything less than 120 and less than 80 is normal blood pressure. Once we get into some of those other categories, we do have some concerns. And so those are things that you're going to want to visit with your primary healthcare provider about and make a plan to keep that blood pressure under control. A big thing is talking about stress. We know that stress has an immediate effect, not only on our blood pressure, but on our overall health. And in fact, the World Health Organization has named stress the health epidemic of the 21st century. It's linked to a lot of pain-linked responses, including heart disease, diabetes, disability, substance abuse, and premature death. So we want to make sure we find ways to manage stress. A key way to do this is to build resilience, which is the ability to withstand some of these stresses that face us in daily life. Keeps us calm, keeps us focused, helps us manage our emotions, and that in turn reduces the frequency of burnout and allows us to be more productive and overall well individuals. So we do have some tools and resources that are available to workplaces and individuals. If you are interested in learning about resilience in the workplace, you can reach out to me and I can provide you with those materials as well. Another thing that we talk about is building individual resilience. Several studies have shown that meditation is a very promising intervention for treating anxiety and depression and alleviating stress. It also has been shown to reduce your risk of heart disease. So however you meditate, whether that's through prayer, whether that's through a guided meditation program, whatever it is that helps you to take that moment and take that time for yourself throughout the day, it's actually very good for your heart. So we encourage you to take that time for you. Some additional hacks just to talk about being well. We sleep is a very important piece of the puzzle. It's very important that we are all getting enough rest. When it comes to meditating, there's no tried and true thing that's perfect for everyone. Everyone has their own method. Everyone has their own way. You find that position that's comfortable. You find that practice that's comfortable for you. But just a few minutes of meditation each day can really make a positive influence on your well-being. And it's so important for your overall health, not just your heart health, but it affects so many other pieces of us that we need to be able to ask for help and really not overlook our emotional and mental health. So that's kind of the picture of what we need to focus on for ourselves. We're going to transition now and talk about our families. So first, we start within, and then we're going to start looking outside. So this is the typical day in the life of an American family. So we'll see how many of these apply to you guys. So we get up, the alarm wakes us up at 6 o'clock in the morning. We're exhausted, we're tired from the night before. We have breakfast, might look something like this. Really, who has time to make something really healthy? Because we're rushing around in the mornings, right? Then it's time to get the kids to school. In 1960, more than half of kids in the United States walked to school. Now it's less than 10. In many of our communities across the Dakotas, this is what a typical school drop-off line looks like. SUVs lined up for miles. In fact, we spend a lot of time in our car. Communities today are designed for cars, not people. The average American spends about 45 minutes a day in traffic. Now, granted, some of us in some areas are spending a lot less time, but we're still spending a lot of time behind the wheel. We get to work and we sit all day long. Then we get home from work, we need to get the kids to soccer practice. So let's grab a quick dinner. And it might look a little something like this. Not a lot of fruits and vegetables on that plate. And then once we're done with soccer practice, done with our afternoon and evening activities, our kids are in front of screens. The National Institute of Health reports that the average child today spends 3 hours watching TV and about 5 to 7 hours total on screens. And we're not much better, because then we go to bed and we have to do one last email, one last Facebook update before we go to bed. And then we go to sleep and we wake up and we do it all again the next day. So the question to you, and this is just more of a rhetorical question, is how can you break those patterns? What are things that you can do to be a healthier influence on your spouse, on your children, on your grandchildren, on members of your family, whatever that looks like for you? So we know that you can look for ways to make healthier choices. So for example, maybe it's making sure that we have healthier snacks for kids in the house. Maybe it's making slight modifications to some of our family dishes by substituting lower fat, lower sodium, or lower sugar alternatives into our favorite recipes. Maybe it is cooking at home more. Maybe it's looking for ways that we can incorporate more outdoor time and less screen time with our families. But it's those little things that we can have an influence on every day that will add up to big changes down the road for everyone in our family. So the final piece we're going to look at is how can we have a healthy influence on our community. And you'll remember in the beginning of our presentation today, I had the statistic on there that heart disease and stroke can be prevented 80% of the time. And that's where we kind of get into the concept of social determinants of health. And this is something that probably many of you have seen before. But we know that when it comes to our health, it's deeply connected to social and economic determinants like wealth or education. So what makes up a healthy community? What makes up a healthy environment? We know that building a culture of health is also about healthy communities. All of the systems in our communities have to work well for our communities to thrive, and health is both an outcome and a determinant of that. That means everyone has a role to play in building a culture of health. We want to make sure that everyone everywhere has the opportunity to live healthy, that they have the opportunity for strong education, that they have the best technology in those classrooms. We want to build a healthy environment. We want safe and affordable housing, a solid infrastructure, and a strong economy for everyone. And you wouldn't normally think about things like having a strong economy as being an indicator on whether or not someone has heart disease. But let me give you an example. In many communities, we have food deserts, or we have areas where families do not have access to good foods. And in our rural areas, this is becoming an even bigger concern as we see local grocery stores continuing to close. So the American Heart Association is working in communities to identify ways to address food deserts. How can we encourage additional economic development and bringing in businesses that will address those needs? Looking at healthy school meals and making sure our kids in their school day are getting access to healthier foods and physical activity. Looking at ways to look at making healthier, more active communities throughout our states. Looking at policies around tobacco control, and then just really kind of looking at our healthcare systems throughout our states to identify ways that we can make sure that no matter where you live, you have access to the very best care. A great example of this is in the state of South Dakota. Our Mission Lifeline project has made sure that no matter where you are within the state of South Dakota, we have a system in place to get you the cardiac care in the time that you need. So that's kind of the big picture on the American Heart Association piece. And now I will turn it over to Rachel for the Department of Health piece.
Thanks, Chrissy. That was some really great information, and I know that there are several little tidbits I plan on taking back home with me. So now that you've heard more about how we can promote heart health in our everyday lives, I want to just take a few minutes and tell you about some of the ways that South Dakota is addressing heart health more broadly through work facilitated through a group called the Cardiovascular Collaborative. And this group is made up of about 70 individuals that work on cardiovascular health in some way, shape, or form. And we have representation from each of the health systems. We've got rural facilities, quality improvement organizations, EMS, and the list goes on. We've got all kinds of different individuals who are part of this group, and everyone really works together to forward the goals and objectives of our statewide strategic plan, which is what you see on the slide here. And we are currently focusing on initiatives around improving data collection, addressing the needs of our priority populations, coordinating and improving the continuum of care, and enhancing prevention and management of heart disease and stroke across the state. And so each focus area has a work group that addresses these strategies listed on the screen. And so I'm going to review some of the work that we've done. Chrissy, you can go ahead and skip to the next slide for me if you would. So I'm going to start out with the priority populations work group, and they have been focusing on promoting different models of team-based, patient-centered care. So for that, the work group members had to gather some background information and found that team-based care was still a pretty new and underutilized concept in South Dakota, and that there's a lot of uncertainty about what's considered team-based care, what different types of team-based care models are out there, and how we can incorporate team-based care into, especially into our rural healthcare environment here in South Dakota. So as a result, the group decided to develop some educational resources, including a toolkit and a webinar series as well. So on the slide, you can see a screenshot of the team-based care toolkit that was developed, and that is housed on the Department of Health website listed on the bottom of the slide. And There are case studies on here. We've got some general information about team-based care within the introduction. We've got some additional tools, resources, references, and a link to a webinar series that was developed. And so anybody who's on the webinar today or that you partner with that works in the healthcare arena, I would really encourage that you take a look at this tool and see if there are any takeaways that you could utilize to help implement or expand any of the current team-based care efforts that are within your facility. Go ahead and skip to the next slide. Additionally, this work group has been looking at promoting community health workers, and a community health worker, also known as a CHW, functions similarly to a community health representative utilized throughout our tribal communities in the fact that they're closely integrated into the community that they serve. There are some slight differences though, and the CHW role has been very successful in our other states, and so now we're just starting to better utilize them here in South Dakota, and so there are several initiatives that we're currently working on to integrate these individuals more widely across our state. But before that happens, we need to get the word out about what these folks can do, obviously. So the Cardiovascular Collaborative actually developed a resource guide to give some more background information on the CHW model. And it also discusses benefits of supporting CHWs within our organizations and gives an overview of the recently implemented Medicaid reimbursement that's been put in place for CHW services. And so you can find this information at the website on the screen. Additionally, since this document was released, there have been a couple webinars discussing CHWs as well, and those can be found on that same website. The work group is also in the process of expanding the current resources to include an assessment tool, and that will help organizations decide if employing a CHW would be a good fit for their organization. And you can expect to see this released this summer, so keep your eyes out for more information in the upcoming months about this. Go ahead and skip to the next slide. Okay. Next, I'm going to move on to the prevention and management work group, and they have teamed up with
Teresa. This is Mary Ann Madden. How are you?
Together, they teamed up with the data group to release a quality improvement assessment that looks at the areas of need and current utilization of quality improvement initiatives across our healthcare environment here in South Dakota. And the assessment revealed that there was quite a wide range of knowledge, staffing, and implementation of quality improvement, which I'll refer to as QI. And it was also evident that there is a disproportionate amount of resources available to facilities, and the resources they do have really depends on their location, size, if they're affiliated with a larger health system, things along those lines. So based on the survey results, the work group decided to compile a list of resources that were already available related to quality improvement and house them in an easily accessible place, which is on the Department of Health website. And a screenshot of that page can be seen here. And then after that, the work group decided to expand this resource guide into a toolkit, which includes some further information related to the QI process, as well as case studies and some additional helpful materials similar to what they did for the team-based care toolkit that I mentioned right before this. Go ahead and go to the next slide for me, Chrissy. Also, as part of our prevention efforts, the Cardiovascular Collaborative developed a digital awareness campaign that focuses on how healthy lifestyle choices can improve overall cardiovascular health. And so On the site listed below the pictures, you can find a full-length video, and we've got multiple sample Facebook posts and other digital media posts. And the collaborative also worked with Great Plains Tribal Chairman's Health Board to develop some Native American specific posts using the Feed Your DNA campaign that had been developed through Great Plains. And we ended up branding these under the Cardiovascular Collaborative so that they could be utilized by anybody. They're not system specific and can be used by any organization. So this kind of helps all of our health systems present a united front and messaging around heart health. So please feel free to use these materials as you see fit. Next slide. The last product coming out of the Cardiovascular Collaborative that I wanted to mention is the develop of the Cardiac Ready Communities program. And the program lead, Megan Lavacek, spoke about this project in depth during the September 2019 Good Health and Wellness webinar. But I did want to just recap. This program has been developed to educate, equip, and empower our local community members so that they're better prepared and they're more confident in helping a patient experiencing a cardiac event prior to the ambulance arriving at that location. So the CRC program, Cardiac Ready Communities program, defines what a community must do to receive the South Dakota Cardiac Ready Communities designation. And there are different criteria supporting the chain of survival through 9 focus areas, and a minimum score must be achieved in each area in order to receive designation. And there is a bunch more information, the designation criteria, as well as a webinar outlining the process for planning or applying for designation also can be found on the website listed at the corner of the screen as well. Go ahead. Finally, I just wanted to mention the heart disease and stroke prevention program that I mentioned at the very beginning. And the program has a funding opportunity available to implement or expand self-measured blood pressure monitoring through the Department of Health. This is through CDC Funding, and is a project that we've been working on for the last couple years and will continue to work on for the next couple years. And you can view the application at either website listed on the slide, and I believe the funding information has been included in the Great Plains Tribal Chairman Health Board newsletter that's come out as well. So you should be able to find information. I don't think it was in this most recent one, but the one before that. But otherwise, I would be happy to talk to anybody who has any interest in applying. We're not looking only at clinics, for example. There are some requirements related to healthcare oversight or to physician oversight, but we are pretty open-minded and looking at thinking outside the box too, into other areas where we could possibly incorporate programs like this. Go ahead and go to the next slide. That really wraps up the presentation for today, and so I thank you very much for tuning in. So I'll just turn things back over to Shannon and give you a chance to have any, ask any follow-up questions or comments if you have any.
Yes, thank you, Rachel and Chrissy, for that great information. If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself at this time or type your questions into the chat box.
Hi, everybody. This is Jennifer. I did just want to say something off of what Rachel said. I believe it was included in our November newsletter. So thank you, Rachel. And we can add those 2 links to our follow-up email if that's okay with you guys to send that out. We'd be happy to share that with our partners.
I would also like to mention that I just put a evaluation link in the chat box. You can click that link to fill out a short evaluation for us. I'd also like to mention that our next webinar is going to be on March 11th at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. And we will have presenters from the American Indian Cancer Foundation reviewing some new nutrition resources that they have, since March is Nutrition Month. Yes, Susan, she asked if there will be a copy of the slides. We can include those in the follow-up email that will be coming out either later today or early tomorrow. That will include the recording and the slides, and then like Jen mentioned, those links to funding opportunities. So if nobody else has any questions for our presenters, thank you again, Rachel and Chrissy and everyone for joining, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Heart Month. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Chrissy.